The battle began not with a presidential decree, but with a spark from the streets. At a tense community town hall in a Queens gymnasium, where residents were grieving another weekend of senseless violence, Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani stepped up to the microphone. He didn't have federal power, but he had a voice burning with the frustration of his constituents. We are told the answer to violence is more police, more surveillance. Bigger budgets for the same failed strategies, he declared, his words captured on a dozen cell phone cameras. But where is the money for our youth centers, for mental health clinics, for after-school programs? They are starving our communities of hope and then policing our despair. The video went viral by morning. The city buzzed. Some cheered, others trembled. Mamdani wasn't just talking. He was drafting legislation to redirect NYPD funding toward community services, a direct challenge to the mayor's entire public safety platform. For Mamdani, it wasn't about politics. It was about survival. It was about protecting families who couldn't let their kids play outside without fear of bullets. Within hours, Mayor Eric Adams fired back with fury. At a City Hall press conference packed with cameras, he thundered, "Zohran Mamdani isn't a serious lawmaker. He's a dangerous radical, an idealist who has never had to answer the 3 a.m. call about a child being shot. He wants to hug criminals and hold hands while our city burns. New York won't be intimidated by Twitter socialists." The crowd of reporters stirred. Adams thought he'd landed the knockout punch, but what happened next would ignite a fire that City Hall was completely unprepared for. The media ran with Adams's words like wildfire. News channels and political commentators clipped his phrases: dangerous radical, Twitter socialist. Social media platforms erupted. Hashtags like #Fund Our Communities and #AdamsFailsNYC trended in minutes. In Queens itself, the situation was boiling. Residents had lived through yet another bloody weekend. 18 shootings, 4 dead. Families were grieving, neighborhoods living in fear. Yet the mayor seemed more focused on battling a progressive assemblyman than battling criminals. Inside his small district office, Mamdani sat calmly, scrolling through messages of support on his phone. Aides urged caution, but Mamdani leaned back, almost smiling. "They think they can shame me out of protecting New Yorkers," he said. His voice carried a mix of calm and fire. "Wait until they see what we do next." Meanwhile, at City Hall, Adams doubled down. He told reporters, "A member of the State Assembly has threatened to defund our police and plunge our city into chaos. We must resist this radicalism." The cameras flashed. His tone was dramatic, but ordinary citizens watching from home shook their heads. Many whispered, "Doesn't he care about the murders? Doesn't he care about us?" Little did Adams know Mamdani's response was coming, and it would cut deeper than anyone expected. "That's my duty as your assemblyman." His words struck a chord. New Yorkers, weary of the political blame game, felt a surge of possibility. For the first time in years, they believed real change, driven by the people, might be possible. But Mayor Adams knew if Mamdani succeeded, his administration's secrets, deals, and backroom schemes would be dragged into the light. By noon, the movement found its voice. A woman named Elena Cruz, an ICU nurse from the Bronx, called into a local radio show, her voice shaking. "My brother was shot walking home from his night shift," she said, choking back tears. "I don't care about the mayor's press conference. I care about safety. When are they going to care about us?" The studio went silent. Listeners messaged the station, their words filled with shared pain. Across the city, more voices joined in: teachers, pastors, bodega owners, all pleading for solutions, not drama. Then the host announced, "We have a guest in the studio who wants to respond." The line clicked, and a familiar voice filled the air. "Elena, I'm Zohran Mamdani," he said gently, "and I'm listening. My office is here not to speak for you, but to amplify your voice. We are building a coalition of community leaders, and we will not be silent." The host stammered, "Mr. Assemblyman, what can you do?" "Every word Elena says is the truth," Mamdani replied. "The priority is safe streets for our mothers, fathers, and kids, and that begins with investing in them, not abandoning them." Outside the hospital, listening on her phone, Elena covered her mouth and sobbed into her coat sleeve. It wasn't politics anymore. It felt personal, direct, and real. At City Hall, aides rushed to Adams with new polling. Support for Mamdani's community funding proposal was surging. The mayor clenched his jaw. "Schedule another presser," he snapped. But the mood had shifted. In living rooms and barbershops, people whispered, "Maybe this time it will be different." A quiet bomb dropped that afternoon. Mamdani's office released a set of leaked documents to a small group of investigative journalists. Hours later, the story broke. A city procurement clerk, speaking anonymously, described contracts for youth engagement services steered to shell nonprofits with ties to the mayor's donors. There were invoices for food programs that never happened, billing for community centers that remained closed. Reporters looked stunned. The article quoted a neighborhood pastor who'd begged City Hall for after-school program funding. "They said there was no money," he said, his voice heavy with pain. "But there was. It just never reached our kids." In Albany, Mamdani met with the state attorney general's office. "Document everything," he urged. "Help us get the truth for these families." Adams hurried to a podium, insisting the leaks were a political hit job by radicals. But news sites put his denial side by side with the leaked invoices. Even loyal supporters squinted at the numbers. Elena texted her neighborhood chat, "If these documents are real, we might finally see where the money went." A shop owner replied with a prayer emoji. By sunset, the city hummed with a new kind of electricity. Not outrage, but expectation. Receipts don't cry, they speak. That evening, under the orange streetlights of the Bronx, neighbors gathered with candles at the corner where Elena's brother was shot. There were no cameras at first, no speeches, just soft hymns and small hands gripping bigger ones. A single NYPD car idled at a distance, the officers inside watching quietly. For once, the block felt guarded by its own people, not abandoned by its city. A modest sedan rolled to the curb. Zohran Mamdani stepped out, alone. Elena's breath caught as he approached, not with an entourage, but with the quiet respect of a neighbor. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I heard your call on the radio. I am so sorry for your loss." He didn't pose for photos. He just listened. He listened to a mother describing sirens that never ended, to a teen who slept on the floor to dodge stray bullets, to a pastor who had buried 2 boys that summer. "I can't bring anyone back," Mamdani said, his voice low and heavy, "but I can bring back accountability. We'll expose the budget lies. We'll support the groups doing the real work. We'll fight for every dollar you were promised. You have my word." Elena's candle trembled. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from anger, but from the strange relief of finally being seen by someone who seemed to understand. 2 blocks away, a TV van arrived too late. They caught only the taillights of his car fading toward the expressway and a neighborhood singing one last verse. For the first time in years, hope felt heavier than fear. Just after sunrise, a small team from the state attorney general's office walked into a quiet city building near the river. No drama, no sirens, just briefcases and a formal request for records. A clerk with tired eyes slid a cardboard box across a table. Inside were binders, invoices, and a small gray flash drive labeled Community Aid Consolidated. An investigator logged each item. The chain of custody had begun. Across town, a legal aide in the mayor's circle stared at her phone as texts stacked up. Freeze disbursements, hold statements, no more emails. She set the phone down and pressed both hands to her face. Reporters, hungry for detail, gathered outside the building. A woman in a suit read a brief statement. "Our office is assisting the Attorney General with a review of funds intended for safety and services." Elena watched on the break room TV at the hospital, clutching a rosary. "Please let the truth be clear," she whispered. Somewhere in that box were the answers, where the dollars went, and why kids were still dodging bullets after so many promises. For the first time, the math might speak louder than slogans. That evening, Mayor Adams' team rushed a primetime speech at a downtown theater. Lights, podium, banners. He hoped to reset the story with one hard swing. But as he spoke, the networks cut their screens in half. On the right, the mayor's polished stage. On the left, a live town hall from a church gym in the Bronx. Folding chairs, families, and a chalkboard with the words, "We want our money back." Zohran Mamdani stood with a handheld mic, no teleprompter. He didn't raise his voice. "The mayor says we are radicals," he said. "We are parents, we are neighbors, and tonight we are launching a public dashboard so every citizen can track every dollar that was promised to this community." A volunteer pulled up the site on a projector. Line items appeared, block by block, vendor by vendor. Gasps rose, then murmurs. "Look at that contract. That's for the center that never opened." Back at the theater, Adams stumbled over a line and reached for his water. The camera cut away. In the gym, a boy in a Little League cap pressed it into Mamdani's hand. "Can we play outside again?" Mamdani knelt. "That's the entire goal." Minutes later, the State Attorney General's office filed an emergency motion to preserve all records and halt suspect city payouts. Phones buzzed across the 5 boroughs. Dawn was coming, and with it, answers. The court order triggered quiet panic inside City Hall. Staffers scrambled, laptops were locked, and the illusion of control was cracking. A young aide slipped into a stairwell, clutching a manila envelope. Inside were photocopies of receipts from a community center that didn't exist. She hesitated, then dialed the public corruption hotline number Mamdani's team had been sharing online. "I can't keep this secret," she whispered. Within the hour, investigators had the documents. They showed massive overbilling tied to homeless services, with funds siphoned through dummy vendors. In his small Queens office, Mamdani reviewed the summary. His expression hardened. "This isn't incompetence," he said to his team. "This is theft from the very people they claim to serve." At a bakery in the Bronx, regulars flipped through the daily news. For the first time in years, the front page wasn't just about another shooting. It was about corruption unraveling at the very top. Elena walked in, her scrubs still on. Someone handed her a paper. She read the headline, whispered a prayer, and smiled faintly. Truth was breaking through. That afternoon, a rally formed outside City Hall, not with polished signs, but with handwritten posters and bullhorns borrowed from churches. The message was raw. Protect families, not cronies. Reporters found order, not chaos. A father lifted his shirt, showing scars from a shooting years ago. "I didn't see my mayor once," he said, "but I know an assemblyman from Queens heard me." Elena stepped up, trembling, holding her brother's photo high. "Don't tell me this is politics," she cried. "This is life. And if our own assemblyman can help clean this up, then let him." The crowd erupted. Back at Gracie Mansion, Mayor Adams watched the coverage, his face pale. His attempt to brand Mamdani as a radical was collapsing. The microphone now belonged to the people. That morning, a handwritten letter went viral. It came from a father in East New York whose daughter was killed by a stray bullet. His words were raw, written in shaky cursive. "I buried my little girl in a white dress. Not one city official called me. But I saw a young man on TV who spoke about our neighborhood like it mattered. If this is what a radical looks like, then maybe we need more of them." The letter, posted by a local pastor, spread faster than any headline. Hashtags flipped from mocking Mamdani to defending him. # stand with Zohran and #NY deserves better trended for hours. Mamdani read the letter in his office, silent for a long time before saying softly, "This is why we don't back down." Adams, desperate, called the letter a political stunt. That misstep only deepened the divide. Elena printed the letter and pinned it on the hospital bulletin board. Patients and nurses stood reading it, many crying. By the third day, crowds gathered outside the Attorney General's downtown office, demanding a full investigation. What started as outrage against the mayor had turned into a grassroots movement against the system he represented. Adams held another press conference, but when he tried to denounce Mamdani again, a protester's voice cut through. "You're the one who let our kids die." The cameras caught it. Networks replayed it endlessly. Elena, in her kitchen, watched and clasped her brother's photo. "Justice is coming," she whispered. That night, a bombshell dropped. An audio recording surfaced of a call between Adams and a real estate developer. His voice was sharp. "We'll lose this battle if the AG keeps digging. We need to shut this down before more records leak. This can't hit the next election." "But what about the families?" the donor asked. Adams snapped. "Forget the families. This is about survival. The tape hit the airwaves. News outlets replayed it in stunned silence. On the streets of Brooklyn, residents gathered around phones, listening in disbelief. Elena's neighbor, an elderly man, threw his cap on the ground. "He never cared," he muttered. "Not once." The city now saw two leaders in sharp contrast, one dismissing lives, the other defending them. That evening, New York lit up, not with anger, but with candles. Thousands poured onto the Brooklyn Bridge for a silent march. Mothers carried framed photos. Fathers held signs with names. The crowd stretched for miles, their silence heavier than any chant. At the front, Elena walked, clutching her brother's picture. Zohran Mamdani walked beside her, just one face in a sea of determined, grieving citizens. Overhead, a drone captured the river of lights. Across the country, viewers wept as they watched ordinary New Yorkers reclaim their city. Adams gave a statement dismissing the march as optics. His words clashed violently with the image of glowing candles. The silence of the people had spoken louder than all his shouting. By morning, it was clear. The mayor who had set out to humiliate a young assemblyman had instead been undone by the truth, by the people, and by history. The tables had not just been turned, they had been carried away by the citizens themselves. The next morning, the state courthouse in Manhattan overflowed with reporters. The Attorney General's office filed an emergency motion citing credible evidence of systemic fraud. Cameras flashed as officials carried in stacks of sealed folders. Inside, the judge's words rang through the chamber. All relevant financial documents from the mayor's office and associated programs will be preserved. Any interference will be treated as obstruction of justice. Gasps echoed across the room. On the courthouse steps, Zohran Mamdani's tone was calm but sharp. "We aren't here to punish City Hall," he told the press. "We're here to protect our neighborhoods. This fraud stole from our families. We end that now." Meanwhile, Elena sat in the gallery, clutching her brother's photo in her lap. For the first time in months, her heart felt lighter. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "This is justice, little brother. It's coming." Outside, crowds gathered with homemade banners. "Protect Bronx families, end the lies." The chant wasn't angry, it was hopeful, rising like a hymn. That afternoon, as the news spread, the city understood. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about truth catching up to power. That weekend, Mamdani didn't need to make a grand arrival. He was already there. He joined a quiet walk through the very neighborhoods that had been drowning in fear. There were no motorcades, just neighbors and community leaders. Residents peeked from windows, then poured into the streets. Mothers embraced him. Fathers shook his hand. Children held up signs they had drawn themselves. The cameras caught the raw emotion. People crying, thanking him, pleading with him not to stop. At a small park, Elena stepped forward with trembling hands. She held out her brother's picture. Mamdani looked at it for a long moment, then placed his hand on her shoulder. "I can't bring him back," he said softly, "but I will fight to make sure no other family feels this pain." Reporters, normally cynical, were visibly moved. One whispered off camera, "I've never seen anything like this." The images raced across the nation. Not a radical, not a socialist agitator, but a leader standing with his people. By evening, even critics admitted Mamdani had taken the mayor's insults and turned them into the most human, unforgettable moment of the year in New York politics. That night, a live stream united the city. The backdrop was simple. Mamdani at the Bronx church, surrounded by candles lit for victims of violence. Families sat behind him holding framed photos of loved ones. Elena was there, her brother's face shining from a portrait. Mamdani's voice was steady, almost breaking. "Tonight, we remember every child, every father, every mother taken too soon. We fight not for politics, but for life, for safety, for dignity. And I promise you, our neighborhoods will rise again because we will lift them up together." As he spoke, the camera panned over the families, tears flowing, hands clasped. Hope reborn. Viewers across the city and the country commented on the stream with a single thought: "We believe again." Meanwhile, Mayor Adams hid behind the closed doors of Gracie Mansion, his name forever linked to scandal and the looming grand jury investigation. He had tried to humiliate a young assemblyman, but ended up humiliated himself by the truth, by the people, and by history. The broadcast ended with Mamdani placing a candle at the altar. The screen faded to black with 3 words in white letters: power to the people. And as tears rolled, New Yorkers felt not just anger or sorrow, but unity, pride, and faith that their own community held the power to demand justice and would never abandon its own. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, if it made you cry for the families and cheer for the truth, don't leave without taking action. Hit that like button so more people hear this powerful story. Drop your comments below. Share your prayers, your thoughts, your emotions. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel. Together, we can keep stories like this alive. Stories that defend truth, hope, and justice.